You remember when Johnny Cash was this nice dude who could be so understanding and kind? Have a second look. He did, in fact, once perform as the Man in Black, leading a choir of condemned prisoners in a gruesome prison song. However, not everyone was blessed with that generosity. The term phony storytellers in makeup was one he would freely use when describing the bands he hated. "I'm going to shoot poor Thelma just to see her jump and fall," said Jimmy Rogers, a country musician from the 1920s, in one of his blue yodel tunes. It is possible that he was the first to pen such a line. "When I composed it, Jimmy wasn't even on my mind. I imagined myself incarcerated there. That's where I aim to immerse myself, of the things about which I am singing." Isn't it difficult to handle when people try to tell you what to do from up high? The next time someone forces their will on you and tells you what to do, you have the option to listen or ignore them. I would never. Singing about hell, drugs, and death would not make me listen to anyone who tried to tell me I was wrong. The reason being that I will never stop doing that. The 6 bands whose names were on the blacklist he maintained till his last years will be revealed today. Believe me when I say that hearing their names will shock you. Now, let's get started. First place, the Aviators. The Eagles are at the very top of Johnny Cash's list of intolerant bands. Yeah, those people. The folks behind Hotel California, those sleek, polished symbols of American country rock from the 70s. But Johnny Cash didn't consider them artists. The salesmen sang their songs. It was in 1974 at a little radio station in Austin when it all started. The song, "Take It Easy," began playing on the tabletop radio while Cash rested between 2 recording sessions. To begin with, he remained silent for 30 seconds. But when the chorus rolled around, he slowly took the guitar from his lap, placed it down, and spoke a word that sent the entire studio into dead silence. Music is lifeless without dust. These individuals are peddling artificial compassion. It might sound simplistic, but for Cash, a musician who sang about hell, drugs, God, and prison, artificial benevolence was the most repulsive thing he could have imagined. Not only did he have serious misgivings about the Eagles, but he took exception to the fact that they were referred to as country rock. In a 1975 interview with Louisiana Sound Review, when asked about the rise of California's modern country wave, Cash sneered, "I don't know if California has any wheat fields, but if they do, I'm sure these guys only use them to shoot music videos." In a rare backstage appearance at the 1976 CMA Awards, Johnny Cash was placed near Don Henley and Glenn Frey. According to a sound technician, Cash quietly asked to switch seats, saying, "I don't sit next to people who write songs like shampoo commercials." And from that moment, everyone in the industry knew, between Cash and the Eagles, there was a moral chasm that could never be bridged. For Johnny Cash, music was not meant to be polished. It had to be torn, raspy, and stained with real life. Don Henley didn't react immediately, but in a 1980 Billboard interview, when asked about artists who didn't acknowledge the Eagles as rightful representatives of Americana, he responded coolly, with a hint of bite. "We don't write music for people who think everything has to be miserable to be real." It sounded polite, but everyone knew exactly who it was aimed at. Glenn Frey was more forthright. According to a tour manager, Frey once said during a backstage talk on their 1981 tour, "Cash hates us because we can stand upright, sing clearly, and still make people cry." Perhaps it slipped his mind that darkness isn't necessarily the source of misery. In the corner, maybe the thing that enraged Cash the most, though, was the fact that people took the Eagles seriously as musicians. They don't sing for the unemployed. They don't sing for prisoners. They don't sing for anyone, except people who already have swimming pools and tape decks in their kitchens. That line sounded like a condemnation in a Nashville radio interview he did once. The Eagles never even attempted to make amends after all those quiet fights. However, in a piece for the Tennessean following Cash's 2003 death, Don Henley conveyed a nuanced and heavily weighted condolence message. "I really doubt he ever took us in. Still, I don't think it's important now. Simply put, we would have no idea what it means to be difficult if you weren't here." The result was an unresolved feud. Cold looks were all that were exchanged. Severe language and icy stillness embraced by 2 realms of music. In a prison cell, on one side, there's an old guitar. Alternatively, there's a $1 million studio with a perfect piano. Ranked number 2 on Johnny Cash's list of inedible artists is none other than Fleetwood Mac. You might be taken aback because there appeared to be no cause for contention between the Man in Black, the king of country, and this lyrical Anglo-American soft rock ensemble. Johnny Cash and Fleetwood Mac have an unspoken but long-simmering rivalry due to their diametrically opposed musical values and pain tolerance policies. Legend has it that it all began in the late 1970s, when the legendary rock band Fleetwood Mac published the critically acclaimed album Rumors, which included a journal detailing the band's struggles with drug addiction, broken relationships, and betrayal. Johnny Cash considered this to be non-art. It was an opioid with a platinum label. He claimed in a 1978 interview with Texas Country Digest that he should write about God and salvation instead of releasing a best-selling album about his girlfriend's infidelity with the guitarist. For reasons beyond its substance alone, this remark was widely thought to be an affront to Fleetwood Mac. However, it coincided with Rumors' meteoric rise to the top of the charts. Cash refrained from using specific names. That was unnecessary, though. Anyone who had read or heard him could tell his analogies and caustic comments were coming from him. They sing like they're journaling after a hangover. He allegedly muttered in a leaked recording of Johnny Cash's concert rehearsal as he scowled at a Fleetwood Mac sample. I don't see how people call that authenticity. While Johnny Cash sang about sacred things, inner struggles, darkness, and faith, Fleetwood Mac became famous for their tear-soaked love ballads, songs that detailed romantic turmoil like a midday soap opera. To him, it was emotional exhibitionism for profit, not art. Fleetwood Mac didn't respond immediately, but Stevie Nicks, known for her poetic and sensitive soul, when asked about Johnny Cash in a 1980 Rolling Stone interview, simply replied, "Some people write music to look up at the sky. Some write to look inward. I don't think one way is better than the other." Not a harsh answer, but enough to show she understood the divide between herself and Cash, and had no intention of changing her perspective. Mick Fleetwood, the band's core drummer, was perhaps the one who hit back the hardest. During a TV talk show appearance in 1982, when asked about artists who criticized Rumors, he laughed and said, "We may have lived the wrong way, but at least we lived honestly. Better than preaching from a wooden pulpit when no one really knows what you've done in the dark." Immediately, the comment sparked buzz. Many believed he was alluding to Johnny Cash's history of drug addiction and dark years. A reverse jab no one expected from a band known for singing about heartbreak. The peak of the conflict happened in 1985, when Johnny Cash refused to attend a music awards ceremony in Los Angeles just because he learned Fleetwood Mac would be there. A source from the organizing committee revealed he told his manager, "I don't sit in the same row with people who turn pain into entertainment." And so he pulled out, quietly but decisively, just like he always handled things. But the irony was this: Johnny Cash never denied their talent. In a 1989 interview, he admitted, "They know how to make music. I'll never deny that, but I can't call it sincere. To me, sincerity doesn't need $1 million studio and a broken heart tantrum to exist." He remained firm. Music must serve the truth, not a wounded ego. Years later, as Johnny Cash entered his resurrection era with the American recording series, Fleetwood Mac also reunited and revived their old glory. When asked whether he still hated them, Johnny simply replied, "I don't hate anyone. I just don't believe in what they're selling." A simple answer, but a clear affirmation that he stood by his own artistic convictions until the very end. The story between Johnny Cash and Fleetwood Mac had no conclusion, but it was a chapter in music history where two life philosophies clashed. One viewed music as confession, the other as declaration, and it was precisely that irreconcilable difference that made both remembered as voices that never compromised. Number 3. The Beach Boys. This third spot, Johnny Cash reserved for the Beach Boys, the iconic band of California summers, of golden beaches, shiny convertibles, and sweet harmonies as sugary as candy. Surprised? You're not alone. To Johnny Cash, the Beach Boys didn't just represent a style of music he'd never embrace. They were something he deeply despised, a beautiful stain on the mirror of American culture. It all began in the early 1970s, when Cash had already become a national symbol. While he brought his guitar into places like Folsom or San Quentin prisons to sing for forgotten souls, the Beach Boys kept releasing hits like California Girls, Do It Again, and Kokomo, all upbeat, sunny songs that seemed almost emotionless, at least from his perspective. In a 1972 backstage conversation recorded by his assistant Lou Robin, reportedly muttered coldly when Fun 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 played on the radio, "What about the people who aren't having fun? Who sings for them?" That line was a quiet knife. For Cash, music was a place to speak the truth. And in his world, truth could be dark, painful, and didn't need to be sugar-coated with brass horns or cheerful major chords. In a 1974 interview on the Midnight Special show, when asked about the Beach Boys, Cash replied with a veiled comment, "I come from the South, where there are no waves." We don't surf. We just try to keep our heads above water and live. Not long after that, during a recording session in Nashville, a young technician suggested that Cash try covering a Beach Boys song as a way to connect with the younger crowd. Johnny set his guitar down, looked the young man straight in the eye and said, "I don't wear swim trunks, and I don't put on sunglasses to pretend. If I haven't lived something, I won't sing about it." To him, the Beach Boys represented a kind of music he called a factory of manufactured emotions. And what bothered him the most wasn't their existence. It was the praise they received. At an awards ceremony in 1976, was invited to present the award for Most Influential Band of the Decade. When the envelope was opened and the Beach Boys' name was announced, Cash gave a faint smile and stepped back from the stage, letting someone else present the award in his place. Not a single word of explanation. The Beach Boys' response: not quite outrage, but also not quite silence. "Johnny is an icon," Brian Wilson said once when asked about Cash. However, he did mention that celebrities sometimes fail to remember that fans need a safe haven from the stresses of everyday life. No one can gnaw on sadness indefinitely. Though it seemed like a mild statement at first, it was actually a nuanced and delicate counterpunch that got to the heart of Cash's concept, which is that music should face, not run from, social issues. It looked like the gap between the two universes widened with the passage of time. As he neared the end of his life, Johnny Cash stopped bringing up the Beach Boys in interviews altogether. Even Brian Wilson, who had become more mute and reclusive, only brought up Cash once, in an interview with NPR in 2002. "His name eludes me, but I don't think we saw the world through the same window." And that said it all. The feud remained, like an intentional coldness between two men living on opposite ends of the musical spectrum. One sang in prisons, sang for the lost. The other wrote songs for the ocean, the sunshine, and days without sorrow. Two men, two visions, two Americas. Number 4. Kiss. Ah, Kiss. Just hearing the name was enough to make an entire auditorium explode. Fire-breathing, drumming from a 3-meter-high platform, sparkling platform boots, and black and white face paint like something out of an acid rock dream. To millions of fans, it was the pinnacle of theatrical rock. But to Johnny Cash, it was a joke. No one would have expected that the man who once sang for inmates at Folsom would have any reason to care about 4 costume musicians styled like Marvel superheroes. But the truth was, he cared enough to absolutely despise them. It all started around 1976, when Kiss began appearing everywhere on American television. They didn't just release albums. They sold toys, Halloween masks, comic books, even makeup kits for children. In an interview in Nashville published in Country Journal, Johnny Cash was asked what he thought of Kiss. The answer landed like a punch. "That's not music. That's a circus with a soundtrack." And just like that, it began. A quiet war waged in cold contempt. In a 1978 television show, when Johnny was invited to comment on the new wave in American rock, he let out a dry laugh and said, "Some people paint their faces to hide the truth. I write songs to strip it bare." He didn't name anyone, but everyone knew exactly who he meant. Gene Simmons, who rarely passed up a chance to clap back, remained silent for a long time. But by 1980, in an interview with Hit Parader, he couldn't hold it in anymore. When asked about reactions from country music legends toward Kiss, Gene smirked, "Johnny Cash. I respect him. But maybe if he tried wearing armor and breathing fire on stage once, he'd realize there are many ways to tell the truth, and some are more exciting than wearing black and strumming sad chords for 3 minutes." That was when the tension exploded into an open rivalry. Johnny Cash's fans criticized Kiss as musical clowns, while Kiss fans called Cash an old grump stuck in the past. But the real source of Cash's anger wasn't just Kiss dressing like monsters. It was the fact that they were successful. While he and other sincere country artists struggled to bring serious lyrics to the public, Kiss sold millions of records thanks to fireworks and high heels. In a leaked backstage recording from the Johnny Cash show rehearsals, he was heard saying bluntly to his assistant, "And suddenly, they're stars. That makes me sick." The irony was that in 1983, while Cash was spiraling again due to a relapse into drug use and losing his contract with Columbia Records, Kiss released Lick It Up, their first album without the iconic face paint, and climbed back to the top. It was like a cosmic smack to Johnny. However, individuals evolved as time went on. After signing with American Recordings in 1994, Johnny Cash re-emerged as a musical superstar with the release of American Recordings, an album played entirely on acoustic guitar. According to the news, it was the revival of genuine spirit. Suddenly, an unexpected event transpired. Gene Simmons was asked about Cash in a non-sarcastic manner during a 1996 MTV interview that was promoting Carnival of Souls. "There is no one quite like Johnny Cash. He can enchant an audience with a single line of music, even without a stage or lighting. Legends are the only ones capable of doing that. For many, this was an attempt at making amends. However, Cash merely shook his head in response to a question about it during a 1997 performance in Austin. Nothing has resented me. However, I will not appreciate those who put on facades to conceal their true selves. In an instant, the possibility of shaking hands disappeared. The conflict between Johnny Cash and the original members of Kiss has died down, but it remains a slash in American rock history, keen as ever, even though both groups have moved on from their golden days. It went beyond a simple generational divide. There was a collision of two aesthetic ideologies. While one held the view that just telling the truth was sufficient, the other felt that the truth should be staged for the benefit of all. Fifth number. You are listening to Lynyrd Skynyrd. You will likely no longer be astonished when we reach number 5. Lynyrd Skynyrd is the only possible choice. With its outlaw cowboy sound, this famous Alabama Southern rock band alienated reviewers and earned Rod Stewart's outright disdain, because they represented an America that Rod could never embrace, in his view. Embraced by symbols of discord, loud and haughty. Midway through the 1970s, when Skynyrd's Sweet Home Alabama was topping the charts, everything started to fall into place. Many took this song as an ode to Neil Young's Southern Man and other critical works of his. Rod Stewart heard something totally different from what most people heard, arousing him of Southern pride. While listening to Sweet Home Alabama at a 1976 New York City backstage party, Rod abruptly halted his talk, furrowed his brow, and uttered a word that caused everyone in the vicinity to tighten their muscles. Look at that flag. The lyrics. They sound like they're attempting to dress a corpse in lipstick throughout the entire song. The remark was an obvious dig at Skynyrd for their frequent use of the contentious Confederate flag, a symbol associated with America's racial division and slavery, on stage and in their album covers. Rod, who had previously spoken out against racism, found that to be intolerable. They aren't merely singing about the South, he stated frankly in an interview with New Musical Express in 1978. By identity, they mean the commercialization of a painful symbol. Ronnie Van Zant, Skynyrd's spirit animal, wouldn't stand for such. This song is for all the gentlemen from over the water who think they can tell us how we should feel about our own land, he proclaimed while staring directly into the television camera, taking the mic. Nobody had to say a word since everyone in the crowd got it. Not only that, but both camps also used the media and the airwaves to insult one another. Even more extreme measures were used by lead guitarist Gary Rossington in an interview with Rolling Stone. Rod believes he is a moral emissary. He sings about liquor and females for half of his albums. It is intriguing to note that Skynyrd perceived music as a means of connecting people worldwide, regardless of race, nation, or tragic past, while seeing rawness as a means of expressing regional pride. By saying, "I sing about people, about love and loss," Rod differentiated himself from Skynyrd. Being authentic doesn't require me to wear a flag. The South is more than simply guns and pickup trucks, despite their claims to being from the South. In addition to his political leanings, Rod Stewart's musical preferences rendered Skynyrd indigestible. At one point, he accused them of behaving as if they were attempting to prove something with decibels, describing their arrangements as loud as a truck plunging from a bridge. Indeed, Skynyrd turned down a 1980 performance invitation to appear with Rod. What was his rationale? "I will not perform on stage beside those who believe that increasing their volume will make them heard." After a long pause, Rod finally said, "I don't think badly of them." In 2015 on a chat show when asked if he still had harsh views about Skynyrd, "The way I think is just different. Maybe it's because we have such different perspectives on life that I've never sang along to any of their songs." As for Skynyrd, Johnny Van Zant, who is younger than Ronnie, declined to elaborate on his relationship with Rod Stewart when questioned about him at a recent performance. It is not necessary, though. A person's right to loathe another person is as free as their right to listen to music. Although their feud between Lynyrd Skynyrd and Rod Stewart was never officially declared war, it also never subsided. Not only did two distinct musical styles collide, but so did two opposing ideologies. One was ardently committed to a gritty, local, unabashed spirit. The other sought worldwide unification and rejected divisive symbols. Music history is so full with meaning because of this irreparable divide. Sixth place. Last but not least, the Monkees, who Rod Stewart, or more accurately, Johnny Cash, just couldn't eat. The Primates. Does it seem strange? Perhaps in your regard. The exception being Johnny Cash, a country music icon in his own right. The artist's songs dealt with the pain of incarceration and the search for redemption. The Monkees represented all that he despised: artificial pretense, commercialized music, and emotions sold in a consumerist package. The beginning was the Monkees' meteoric rise to fame in the United States in the late 1960s. They had their own music video, stage act, and legion of devoted followers. However, Johnny Cash saw it as nothing more than a stage production. During an interview with Rolling Stone in 1969, Cash was quite direct when he said, "They didn't come from the road of music. They came from Hollywood. And I don't believe in music written from a script." As someone who sang for the forgotten poor and performed for inmates at Folsom, Cash believed that music had to be truthful and authentic, regardless of how painful or rough it was. As for the Monkees, he referred to them as Kin Pop, easy to swallow and forget. In his memoir, Man in Black, he recounted the first time he watched the Monkees show on TV in 1967, while taking a break from touring. "They looked like they'd never left the studio as I watched them play guitars, sing about love, and laugh. Off the air it went. It doesn't necessary to sound like an ad for chewing gum and have insincere laughing." Listen to the Monkees' reaction if you believe Johnny Cash was nothing more than a cranky old guy. Famous frontman Davy Jones reportedly told Teen Scene, "Johnny is a great artist, but not everyone needs to sing in prison for their feelings to be real." This was in 1970. The media went into a frenzy after hearing that comment. Finally, the Monkees had opened fire. The situation became even worse when the media started praising the Monkees as the American Beatles. This was a direct attack on Cash's dignity. He snarled, "The Beatles changed music" during a 1971 radio appearance in Nashville. Their TV schedule was altered by the Monkees. Cultural influence is not the same as Nielsen ratings. The worst part, though, was yet to come. The Johnny Cash Show, Johnny Cash's own television program, debuted in 1969 on ABC. He featured renowned musicians like Neil Young, Bob Dylan, and Joni Mitchell in the August program of that year, but he firmly rejected producers' suggestions that he bring on the Monkees to appeal to a younger demographic. They need to get off that comedy set before they can compose true music. Johnny Cash never expressed regret for the Monkees' decision not to perform on his show. One of the most serious musicians of all time, Monkey Mike Nesmith, launched his country rock solo career in 1973. Interestingly, he had songs aired on Nashville radio, and some of them even peaked at the same position as Cash's work. I don't expect you to forget where he began, Johnny, but he's moving in the right way. When I asked him how he felt about it, he just shrugged. Is there any chance that this feud will ever be resolved? Johnny Cash may have softened with age, but a journalist asked him about the Monkees' reunion concert in 1997, 6 years before he passed away. Johnny shook his head and sipped his coffee. Water isn't always effective at removing stains. The ultimate judge of reality is time. Also, I still think they're just musicians dressed as actors. Long periods of time elapsed. They all left without saying a word. Johnny Cash died believing in authenticity, and the Monkees, despite being mocked at one point, made a mark on popular culture. There was utter quiet, two separate paths that never met, and not a single handshake, reconciliation, or touching conclusion. For just 6 names alone, Johnny Cash, a guy who sung for the lost and lived for truth, became scowling, critical, and even contemptuous. However, how do you feel? In your opinion, was Johnny Cash too harsh, or did he make a valid point? Leave a comment telling us which band you think doesn't belong in the artist category. If you want to find out more hidden secrets about rock music, hit the like, share, and subscribe button. Thanks for watching.